have a seat. Good times. Here's something for you, friends. Faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. For by this, our ancestors were approved. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. And by faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was approved as a righteous man because God approved his gifts. And even though he is dead, he still speaks through his faith. By faith, Enoch was taken away, and so he did not experience death. He was not to be found because God took him away, for before he was taken away, he was approved as one who pleased God. Now, without faith, it's impossible to please God, since the one who draws near to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith, Noah, after he was warned about what was not yet seen and motivated by godly fear, built an ark to deliver his family. By faith, he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed and set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance. And he went out even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, living in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, co-heirs of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was unable to have children, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. Therefore, from one man, and in fact one as good as dead, came offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky and as innumerable as the grains of sand along the seashore. And all these died in faith, although they had not received the things that they were promised. But they saw them from a distance, greeted them, and confessed that they were foreigners and temporary residents on the earth. Now, those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they were talking about where they came from, they would have had an opportunity to return. But they now desire a better place, a heavenly one. And therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. He received the promises, and yet he was offering his one and only son, the one to whom it had been said, your offspring will be traced through Isaac. And he considered God to be able even to raise someone from the dead, and therefore he received him back, figuratively speaking. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning the things to come. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and he worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, as he was nearing the end of his life, mentioned the exodus of the Israelites and the instructions concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, after he was born, was hidden by his parents for 3 months because they saw that the child was beautiful and they did not fear the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter and chose to suffer with the people of God rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin, for he considered reproach for the sake of Christ to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, since he was looking ahead to the reward. By faith he left Egypt behind, not being afraid of the king's anger, for Moses persevered as one who seeks him who is invisible. By faith he instituted the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch the Israelites. By faith he crossed the Red Sea as though they were on dry land. The Egyptians attempted to do this, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after being marched around by the Israelites for 7 days. By faith Rahab, the prostitute, welcomed the spies in peace and didn't perish with those who disobeyed. And what more can I say? Time is too short for me to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets. Time is too short. We've got time. Friends, over the next few weeks, we're going to be thinking about these few dudes that are mentioned briefly at the end of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32. We're going to be talking about why they make this list, since we've got time. But before we start, I haven't forgotten to bless you this morning. I bless you in the name of Jesus, to know Jesus even more wonderfully today. I bless you to receive healing in your body, in your mind, in your spirits, and in your emotions today. I bless you with help and guidance from God so that you can prevail in whatever circumstances and challenges you find yourself in this season, so you can flourish. And I bless you to experience the love, the joy, the hope, and the peace of God today. May it be good times, fun. I'm excited to get a chance to speak to you about this stuff today. An exciting thing to talk about. We've been talking about kind of like pretty heavy things over the last little while, so we're going to have a little bit of fun with this over the next few weeks. Very exciting things to talk about on a very exciting day for me and Jamie. It is our 11th wedding anniversary today. Cute. Look at us up there. In that photo, although it's black and white, you wouldn't know it, a little bit more brown on the walls of the West End, and also in the hair in the photo. There's a little bit more white up there in both places, but who cares? I don't care, at least. C'est la vie. And I love a little bit of nostalgia. And this is like a well-timed piece of nostalgia, because a wedding anniversary is an opportunity to look backwards at like the day. But when you look back to that day, you see people who are looking forward to the rest of their lives together. It's a look back at people who are looking forward. And that's just exactly what Hebrews chapter 11 is doing. So what a great day. What better day to talk about this on a wedding anniversary. I mean, we have got a little bit of a busy day today, but I've got a little dinner date planned for us tomorrow. I saw a little Rita Reviews recommendation on her story. Click, click, boom. And I've got it. Appreciate you and your Instagram. Good times. So let's move on with a little look back to people who are looking forward, because we're looking back at all of these people who represent the spiritual heritage of these people who are receiving the letter. But it's not just a pure nostalgia fest. It's a look back to see people who are looking forward. And that's important for us to think about at the start of our message, because we're not islands. And we don't exist in a vacuum. Like some things, actually like loads of things, have brought us to where we are now and are still currently contributing to where we are going to go after this. And these things stack up. And the writer to the Hebrews give this whole list of people and reasons, like people that represent the spiritual heritage, like this in the big story of their faith, and things that they have done. And it's such a long list that he just like chucks a few dudes in at the end that get a shout out and a name drop, but they don't really get the whole thing mentioned. So we're going to take some time over the next few weeks to think, why are they on this list? Why are they on this list and not some other people? Are they like, why are they so great? Are they really all that? And we're going to be thinking about where we might rank them on a tier list. And we're going to be thinking about how the writer to the Hebrews did have time to elaborate on these people, what sort of things that they might have said. And we're going to start with Gideon, and that means Judges, and that means Judges chapter 6, and that means thinking about what the book of Judges goes like. The book of Judges contains this cycle where the people sin, and they abandon God, they disobey God. And then God lets the bad guys take over for a while. And then the people cry out to God. And then God sends a judge to rescue them. And then there is peace for a while, but only for a while, because the people sin again and they abandon God again. And the whole thing starts all over again. And by the time we get to Gideon in Judges chapter 6, we're like a few cycles in. And the same things happen again. The people have sinned and they've abandoned God. And this time God lets the Midianites and their allies, the Amalekites and the Kedemites, take over for a while, and it stinks. God's people are being heavily oppressed. They're having to flee their homes and live in the mountains and in caves. Constant attacks mean there is like a severe food shortage and famine in the land. So in their oppression and in their poverty, the people cry out to the God that they had abandoned for help. And that's where Gideon comes into play. And I wonder what your hot take on Gideon is. Like, when you think of him and his character and his story, like, what sorts of impressions do you get? And suppose to put it really simply, like, Gideon, is he a good guy or a bad guy? And my money would be on, like, that him being a good guy. Do you know, we can't think of him as being like one of those, like, Sunday school heroes, very tellable stories. He even gets like a whole VeggieTales episode. If something that's you remember or care about, I hope you don't, because that episode is particularly bad. But I feel like, you know, you want to give Gideon a fair go. Like, you want to give him a fair shout. And the first ever sermon that I ever preached at Rehope or anywhere was about Gideon. And back then, I really wanted to give Gideon a fair go, because the circumstances that he finds himself living in are extremely, extremely difficult. And then the thing that he gets asked to do on top of that is extremely difficult. So I want to give him a break. Here's a little snippet of a story, so we can see what we're talking about. It says, the angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak that was in Ophrah. And this angel of the Lord, we can tell later, turns out to be Jesus. But anyway, sitting under this tree that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. And his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, the Lord is with you, valiant warrior. And Gideon said, please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, and why has all this happened? Where are all his wonders that our ancestor told us about? They said, hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to Midian. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. I am sending you. So what are we going to take from this? I mean, there's a lot going on already. And sometimes when we read the Bible, like, prior knowledge can sometimes get in the way of an accurate read for us. You know, like, if you know the rest of the Gideon story and he's going to go to battle and do all the things, and maybe you're like, oh, valiant warrior, that makes sense. And it kind of colors where you're at with your read, and evaluation skills can sometimes go out the window, and that's not good. Here's a little thing for us. This is Bloom's taxonomy for higher order thinking skills, and every teacher just went, oh, it's the holidays, but sorry. It doesn't normally look this good, though, if I do say so myself. Bloom's taxonomy for higher order thinking skills is a thing that this dude developed to teach people how people learn. And you can see there, starting down at the bottom, the foundations for that is remembering. And if we apply that to Bible study, it's like we want to know what the text says. And then moving up to understanding, we want to know what it means. And then moving up to applying, like, we want to know how we do that. And that's normally where people stop. What does it say? What does it mean? How I do that? Okay, cool, we're done here, right. But actually, no, because normally we stop short at analyzing and not seeing how the whole text fits together. Like, how does this thing help me to understand this thing that comes later? Key comes later. We stop short at evaluating. We stop short at thinking, is this thing a good thing or a bad thing? Like, this dude, I think, is a good dude, but he does this thing. Is that in his character as a good dude, or out of character as a bad thing? Do I want to emulate this or not? And we stop short at creating, like, how can I create a pathway for myself to actually do this thing? So we do the remembering, we do the understanding, we do the applying. That's good, but sometimes we haven't thought through things deeply enough to make that applying actually stick. We got to go through with that. Evaluation is a pretty underrated Bible study skill, and for a collection of books that is so diverse and complicated, containing human characters that are so diverse and complicated, I mean, we should not snooze on this skill. It's an important one, so we're going to have a little go at it today, and we're going to think about the question, is Gideon really a valiant warrior? Well, what does the text say? It says, I mean, for a long time I read, it says he's a valiant warrior, but for a long time I read this valiant warrior thing as sarcastic, and here's why. Because Gideon is in a wine press threshing wheat, and that's not normally where you do that. Like, a wine press is a hole in the ground, you put all the grapes in, you stomp on them, and the juice runs out a little channel at the bottom, and dude is hiding in a hole. Like, my dude is hiding in a hole right now. So valiant warrior. Like, really though? Is that what's happening here? Dude is hiding in a hole. Do you blame him? Do you blame him? What's he supposed to do? Well, maybe we should blame him. I don't know. What does the text say? The text says that if you go out and try and get some food, you are making yourself an instant target for attack. It says that they will come and attack you and kill you and destroy your possessions. You go out there and try and provide for your family and your friends. You are inviting death. So, okay, Gideon is threshing wheat in a hole in the ground. Do you blame him? He's no mug. Makes sense that he would hide it. Being out there at all is brave. And let's not forget that the rest of the dudes are hiding in caves and mountains, but Gideon is in his hometown. He's brave. He is. He's brave. Pretty brave. Fair play, Gideon. So is he a valiant warrior then? Well, we could definitely start to make a case for that. But then things get complicated because problems come, because the rest of the big section of Gideon's events of his life are dominated by Gideon's fear. Like, Gideon gives God all this oh, my family is the worst. It's the worst. I'm the worst out of my family and it's the worst chat. And we see that kind of self-deprecation a lot in the Bible, you know? We see Moses do it at the burning bush, for example, and God has limited patience for that. But we see King Saul give it a rattle. We see Jeremiah go for it. So I kind of don't want to be too harsh on Gideon for doing this. It kind of feels like it's just maybe a cultural thing, like when someone asks you if you want a cup of tea and you have to say no first. Even if you really want a cup of tea, you've got to say no. Are you sure? Actually, I'd love one. Maybe it's just one of those things that Gideon's going through the motions. I don't want to be too hard on him for that, but this testing God thing, that's a real thing. And that seems to not be a very valiant warrior thing. That seems to be a bit of a fear-dominant thing. Because Gideon and God start doing this little dance where Gideon tests God, and then God proves himself, and then Gideon goes and does the thing that he was supposed to do in the first place. And in this case, Gideon makes God hang about while he goes and prepares a gift, and then God proves himself. And to be fair to a dude, Gideon offers him a gift of meat and bread and broth. It's food during a giant food shortage. That shows faith. For that one, I've got to say, fair play, Gideon. He knows that this is important, and he treats this guest as important, even though he doesn't quite understand the significance of it yet. But then God proves himself, and Gideon's yo, this was actually God. I better go and do the thing that he told me to do. So he goes and he tears down his own dad's altar to Baal and his own dad's Asherah pole and builds up an altar to Yahweh, the God of the Bible, and sacrifices on it and reestablishes the worship of Yahweh. And okay, he does it under the cover of night, but he's going to know that he's going to get caught almost instantly. And he gets caught almost instantly, but then God keeps him safe from the people in the town who wanted to kill him. So this is the way it's kind of going. I don't want to be too critical of Gideon for being scared all the time, although he is scared all the time, because I've still got to conclude that he gets the job done. Yes, he tests God, and then God proves himself, and Gideon does the thing, but then he learns that he can trust God in that. So it shows that he's going to trust God forever and do all the things, no questions asked, right? Not quite. It's time to fight the bad guys, though. And Gideon tests God again and again by putting this fleece on the ground. And he says, God, I want the fleece to be wet with the dew of the morning, but not the ground. And God says, okay. And he's like, right, that's not enough for me, actually, God. Let's run this in reverse. And God says, okay, fine. And he does it. And then Gideon's like, right, fair enough. I'll go and fight the bad guys. And he does go, even though God reduces the size of his army from 32,000 men to 300 men, and that's a drop, by the way, and they're going up against 135,000 soldiers, so good luck, Gideon. It turns out he's a little bit scared. Do we blame a dude? Probably not. But he goes, even though he's scared, and we know he's scared because God says to him, go and fight them, and I'll hand them over to you. But if you're scared, take your servant and go up the hill and have a wee spy on them. And he takes his servant and he goes up the hill and he has a wee spy on him. And when he's there, he hears that one of the bad guys has had a dream, and the other bad guy is like, that's because I know that Gideon is going to beat us. And suddenly he's filled with faith. And he goes and he does the thing. We know that he's scared, but
he kind of keeps overcoming, feels a bit reluctant, kind of feels like God like pushes him over the line every time, but every time he overcomes his fear, and every time he is obedient, every time. So it's great, but it's not great like he's hesitant, he's scared, but he gets it done. Like he's paying attention to what God is doing, and he sees his circumstances. Like he feels his fear, but he does what he needs to. He has faith. He has the faith to step into what the writer of the Hebrews says is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen yet, the proof of the victory. Like he has faith in that. He goes to do it. And Gideon chooses faith over fear. And he chooses it every time. Even though he saw the challenges, even though he felt them, he overcame his fear and was obedient. And that feels like something that I would love for myself. And it feels like something that I would love for you here, no matter what circumstances you find yourself in. Choose faith over fear. And that's the end of the story of Gideon, according to most Sunday school tellings. And I kind of get that because after this, things get messy. And dude seems to have like this personality transplant. Like when he was fearful all the time, like now we kind of see like this like weird like power trip thing going on with him, and like all of this like anger that's bubbling up. Like he's mad at the Ephraim people because they're mad at him, but that seems to get sorted out quite quickly. But then he beefs with the men from Succoth and from Peniel from not helping him, and he makes all these threats to like torture them and come back and destroy their towns. And you're like, Gideon, like, don't. And he's like, how about I do it anyway? And as if that's not bad enough, he comes back from finishing the battle, he like tortures them, and he destroys the town of Peniel, and he kills all the men from Peniel. And you're like, And to make matters worse, then he goes on to completely undo all the good that he had done. He completely destroys all of his accomplishments. It's wild. Like, okay, get this. And this kind of captures Gideon for me. Like, Judges chapter 8, starting in verse 22, says, Then the Israelites said to Gideon, Rule over us, as well as your sons and your grandsons, for you delivered us from the hand of Midian. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And you're like, all right, Gideon, yeah, cool, nice one, I love that. Then he said to them, let me make a request of you. Everyone give me an earring from his plunder. Now the enemy had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites. And they said, we agree to give them to you. So they spread out a cloak, and everyone threw an earring from his plunder on it. And the weight of the gold earrings he requested was 43 pounds of gold. Now, for the record, and I checked this morning, that amount of gold would cost 949,443 pounds and 17 pence if it was bought this morning, a la gold. In addition to the crescent ornaments and ear pendants and purple garments on the kings of Midian and the chains on the necks of their camels. And Gideon made an ephod out of all this and put it up in Ophrah, his hometown. And then all Israel prostituted themselves by worshiping it there. And it became a snare for Gideon and his household. And when Gideon died, the Israelites turned and prostituted themselves by worshiping the Baals and made Baal Berith their god. And the Israelites did not remember the Lord their God who had rescued them from the hand of their enemies around them. They did not show kindness to the house of Zerubbabel, that's Gideon, for all the good things that he had done for Israel. All the gold, right? Like as close to makes no difference, £1 million worth of gold. And Gideon started off by destroying idol worship in his hometown and reestablishing the worship of Yahweh. And he finishes by building an idol, setting it up in his hometown, and everybody forgets about Yahweh, the God of the Bible. And you're just like, and he made it out of earrings, which sounds all a bit too much golden coffee for like my comfort. I'm just like, Gideon, dude, what happened? And I mentioned earlier that at a time in my life, I really wanted to give Gideon like a fair shout. But then I went through this phase of just thinking that he was the worst. The worst. Like, look at how he ends. Guy, like, what is it? And when I was in seminary classes in Portland, this one time we were talking about Gideon, and I let my feelings be known, as is my way. And I was like, I'd give Gideon like 4.5 out of 10. And everyone was like, 4.5 out of 10. Like, and I was like, yeah, think about it. Like, he destroys like the thing, and then in his whole life, then he goes like absolute like ego trip crazy. And then his legacy is idol worship in Israel. 4.5 out of 10. And my buddy was like, oh, I named my son after Gideon. Maybe 4.5 out of 10 is too harsh. Maybe I should give him a fair shout. But this ending really makes it hard for you to give him a fair shout when you look at what his legacy is. It really makes it hard. I mean, if all's well that ends well, does that also mean that like all stinks, the ends stink? Because this ends stink. So here's something that I'm taking away from Gideon's story. Look, faithfulness until the end counts. It really, really matters. And it's brutal when a life lived well ends poorly, and that happens all too often. And Gideon showed faith when he needed to, but it seems like the faithfulness, like the continuation of that, just evaded him. And what could have been like a legit legacy of the worship of Yahweh in the country of promise ends up being a legacy of idolatry. And that's brutal. And it feels like things are like worse, if not the same, as when he started off, like brutal. But then this last verse in that wee paragraph gets me. It says, they did not show kindness to Gideon for all the good things he had done for Israel. And I'm still evaluating, and I'm thinking, should they have shown kindness after how this ended? I don't know. I mean, you've heard probably 3 strikes and you're out. Feels like in this day and age, it's not 3 strikes and you're out. Feels like it's 1 strike and you're out. Feels like you make 1 mistake and you're toast. To be fair, though, some mistakes are worth like 1 billion strikes and you're out. And I don't know, 4.5 out of 10, this kind of feels like one of those mistakes, doesn't it? 1 billion strikes, Gideon, you're out. But he makes the list of the heroes of the faith. And it doesn't really particularly seem like the writer to the Hebrews is all that concerned with Gideon's mistake or anybody else on that list's mistakes. The writer is focusing on the good things that they did that contributed to the faith of the generations that would come after. And they're thinking about the good stuff that happened. And sure, we can go back and read Gideon's story and get the full data sample and learn from the warnings from his mistakes as well. But since the writer of the Hebrews seems to be placing more focus on the good things, I guess if they were writing a full thing about Gideon, then maybe they'd say something like this. By faith, Gideon overcame his fears and delivered the Israelites from the hands of their enemies. By faith, he saw the victory that God would achieve in impossible circumstances. Something like that. Maybe you could come up with something better. Because I'm still evaluating. 4.5 out of 10 seems too low, doesn't it? It seems too low. I'm finding it hard to put a number on that. So I'm just going to tier list Gideon. And this is where I think he belongs. Obviously, in this tier list, S is the highest rank, and D is the lowest rank. I'm going to put Gideon with a B, like some high highs, but like a really low ending. But it still feels like it's not my place to rank one of the like Hall of Famers. And maybe if I'm ranking them up against the other people on this list, Abraham, Moses, all those people, then maybe Gideon's a B. I would dread to think where I would come in this tier list before you think I'm being smug. But Gideon's failures are there for us all to see, and the writer of the Hebrews doesn't focus on them, but it's pretty hard to ignore them. So how does he end up on this list with such big failures? Well, a conclusion that I have come to and we're probably going to revisit over the next few weeks, is that your sins don't define you. Your faith defines you. Gideon's sins don't define him. His faith defines him. And I like what the writer of the Hebrews says about Abel. Even though he's dead, his faith still speaks. And for Gideon, that's going to be true. I would love that to be true for me. I know my mistakes are many, but I hope that my faith is going to contribute to the story of faith, like for this church or into the future. Who knows what God has in store for me, for those people, as we think about what our spiritual legacy is. Faith is like the proof of what we can't see yet. It's exciting to think about what we can't see yet. I'm much more inclined to look back fondly than to look forward excitedly. But as we kind of get into our challenge for today, and as we start thinking about our spiritual heritage, we're thinking about persevering to the end. Gideon, choose faith over fear. Continue and persevere in faithfulness till the end, and contribute to the spiritual legacy of those people who are going to come after you as well. And that's our challenge for this week. I want you to spend some time thinking about your spiritual heritage. Who are the people who have contributed to your faith, in particular to your coming to faith moment? Maybe people are jumping to your mind already. Maybe that's like family, friends, I don't know, whatever. You'll know who they are. When you're doing this challenge, don't make every Christian you've ever met part of your story. Think about the big hitters, the people who are important for you. And for me in my story, I'm kind of thinking about my grandparents and my parents who contributed in turn to my coming to faith moment. But maybe your story is not going to be 3 generations long. Maybe you weren't thinking about Jesus at all, and then one person came along and helped reawaken your heart to Jesus, and you're going to be like this one person. Your story is still amazing and wonderful. A little shorter, who cares? Your story is wonderful. Think about your spiritual heritage. And something that I like to do with this is use the Hebrews kind of model of starting with the creation of the world and working all the way up in a praise prayer. So I'll start with God made the world and go through all kind of the biblical narrative, but then I'll think about how it kind of drops off with the apostles and the disciples spreading the gospel across Europe. Eventually that gets to Ireland through Patrick, and great. And eventually it got to Scotland, and great. I live here now, and it's fun. And I like to use that in a praise prayer, and I really love to do it in pre-service prayer. And I'll pray something, snappy. Something like, God, you made the world and everything in it. You gave promises to Abraham and Sarah, and you started working on them. You rescued your people from Egypt through Moses and brought them into the land you promised them. God, you sent judges and provided prophets and kings to guide the people. And then you sent your son who lived and died and rose again to prove that he really is who he said. He is the Son of God, the Messiah, and he rescued his people. You sent your disciples and apostles to spread your gospel, even into Europe. You brought your message to Ireland through Patrick and preserved it in the generations until it reached Mervyn and Florence Crooks, Sarah and David Hamilton, and then Joan and Roger Crooks, and then to me. And I praise you, God, for preserving your word and your salvation throughout the ages and extending it even to me. Amen. And that's it. And sometimes I like to do a little detour via Seattle for Brian and Kelly, who have been really important people for strengthening my faith. And it's fun to do this. It's fun to see how you're connected with the whole story. Do this challenge. Write it down. Practice praying it. And then at pre-service prayer next week, use it to pray and praise God for who he is, what he's done, and how you fit into his big picture.